Well, I have the honor to open the second question, and it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague Sicilis, which will speak about New Phrygian and the connections with Greek dialects. Please.
Well, object of this paper is the language. No. Well, object of this paper is the languages in which the so-called New Phrygian inscriptions were written. Till now, it was believed that it represents an Indo-European language. A new approach based on the data of medieval and modern Greek dialects allows us to doubt the correctness of this view. The paper is based on a forthcoming monograph, Greek and New Phrygian, the language of the New Phrygian, quote, inscriptions. Well, it is generally accepted that the Phrygians were neighbors of the Macedonians and that they arrived in Asia Minor before 1000, that is, between 1200 and 1000. The Phrygian capital, which enjoyed great prosperity in the 8th and 7th century BC, was Gordion. During this period, they occupied a sizable part of what is today modern Turkey. The most famous king of Phrygia was the well-known Midas, but during his reign, the Cimmerians conquered the Phrygians. Now, the history of the Greek-Phrygian contacts can be divided into three periods. First, the period of the Balkan coexistence. Second, the first Asia Minor period, from their arrival till the conquest of Phrygia by Alexander the Great. And third, the second Asia Minor period, that is from the conquest of Phrygia by Alexander till their supposed final assimilation. Our knowledge of the Greek-Phrygian contacts during the first period is very limited and is actually restricted to some hypotheses concerning the Phrygian influence on Macedonia and the close relations between Macedonians and Phrygians. It is, of course, difficult to investigate nature and consequences of language contact at that remote time, but we can undertake a preliminary attempt taking into consideration the lack of historical evidence and the scarcity of linguistic data. Now, the crucial question, the crucial problem concerning this first period is, are there Phrygian elements in other Greek dialects? Well, this problem will be examined in another paper, and we go on. Although the literature concerning, I don't know, do you hear me now? Yeah, good. Although the literature concerning the Phrygian language is very rich, crucial issues about the nature and structure have not met a convincing answer. Well, what are the relations between Old Phrygian and New Phrygian? Is the traditional classification of Phrygian monuments into Old and New Phrygian a purely technical, or we have to do with different languages? That is the view supported by Haas. It is sure that Phrygians during the time that the so-called New Phrygian inscriptions were written were bilingual, but it is not sure whether the second language was Koine or a local Greek variety. What is the relation of the language in which New Phrygian inscriptions were written with the so-called Anatolian Greek and with neighboring dialects, especially with Pamphylian? The study of the Phrygian language, which is supposed to cease to be spoken in the 4th to 5th centuries AD, is based on the analysis of the epigraphical material, personal names, place names, and words which the ancient authors mention as Phrygian. The Phrygian inscriptions date in two different periods, one earlier from the 8th to the 4th century, and one later from the 2nd to 3rd centuries AD. Well, it is the first time that I use the PowerPoint, so I forgot to show you something. Well, who were the Phrygians, neighbors, and then the three periods, the history of the context is divided, you can see it, and we go weiter. Now, the Phrygian inscriptions, as I told you, date into different periods, one earlier from the 8th to the 4th centuries BC, and one later from the 2nd to 3rd centuries AD. Till now, we believe that the Phrygian inscriptions represented an Indo-European language with the following features. Vowels. The Indo-European long E developed into A. Well, I don't repeat the examples because we have not enough time. The Indo-European long O changes into U. The short O before final N changes into U. Specialists disagree about whether there was any phonological distinction between long and short vowels in Phrygian. They also disagree about whether Phrygian was a Satem or a Kentum language, and about whether it was a language that underwent Lautverschiebung. Today, it is almost generally accepted that it was a Kentum language, whatever this is, and a language that didn't undergo Lautverschiebung. The Indo-European syllabic liquids and nasals had a development similar to that in Greek. You can see the examples. It was also believed that the similarities between the two languages, that means Greek and Phrygian, in morphology and vocabulary were due to their shared Indo-European heritage or to shared innovations. The features that belong to the first category, that is, these due to the shared Indo-European heritage, include the Indo-European relative pronoun, the Indo-European relative pronoun ios, which is found in Phrygian as ios, in Greek as hos, but we know that in Mycenaean it was pronounced as ios, exactly as in Phrygian. The proclitic e, which appears in Greek in words like ekinos and echthés. The augment e, which is of the same provenance as the above-mentioned pronoun. For example, Greek ethikes and Phrygian e tha es. And the similar way of forming the passive perfect participle, that is reduplication, zero grade, and ending in menos. Features that are due to shared innovations are Phrygian onoman and Greek onoma, which are derived from the same Indo-European form with assimilation e-o-o-o. And finally, the Greek adjective chloros and the Phrygian gluros chrysos, which must be regarded as later shared formations. The establishment of the phonetic and phonological system of this language was based mainly on the analysis of New Phrygian inscriptions. That is why we'll focus on this part of Phrygian. The New Phrygian inscriptions, numbering just over 100, are written in the Greek alphabet of the imperial period. Based on the structure of the inscriptions, we can divide them into two groups. First, the formularized inscriptions, in which the Phrygian text is usually stereotypical in content, being a kind of curse on anyone who damages the grave. It consists of two parts, protasis and apodosis, and the most usual form is Ios ni semun knuma kakun adaket tetikmenos ito. Whoever inflicts harm to this tomb, let him be punished, or something like that. The second group, the non-formularized inscriptions, in which Phrygian was used to convey additional information concerning the owner of or the person to whom the monument was dedicated. Although the number of the inscriptions of the first category is much larger compared to that of the second, the inscriptions of the second category, that is the non-formularized, are of much more importance for the study of the language. The reason is simple. If the use was restricted only to the formularized inscriptions, we could hardly reach the conclusion that New Phrygian was a spoken, a living language. It is known that ritual words, aphorisms, or tags in a language different from the rest of the inscription may have nothing to reveal about the linguistic, you can read it, competence of referents or clients. Now, comparing the descriptions and interpretations of the non-formularized inscriptions, which we said that they are the most important for the study of the language, as they are exposed in the three main monographs, that is Haas, 66, Neroznak and Diakonov, 96, and Ariol, 97, we can easily realize that there is too little agreement as to what Phrygian was supposed to be. Nothing else reveals better the uncertainty which reveals in this field than this absolutely negative attitude of the authors of these monographs towards former works. Diakonov and Neroznak, speaking of Haas is the first basic work on Phrygian, they write, "It was done in a very unsystematic, subjective, and internally contradictory way, so that from the point of view of modern Indo-European linguistics, the results proved to be useless." A few years later, Woodhouse, in an objective evaluation of their work, I mean of the work done by Diakonov and Neroznak, state, "Rather less worthy, despite the massive effort and ingenuity involved, are a couple of attempts by Soviet scholars to provide complete translation of the entire Phrygian corpus. They incorporate some unorthodox views of Phrygian phonology and have more than their fair share of bizarre interpretations." All this leads us to a pessimistic view about the potentials of the Phrygian studies. It seems that a radically new approach to the problem of the Phrygian is required. Phrygian, whatever this variety represents, was used alongside with Koine, or local dialects, at the state of bilingualism, unbalanced bilingualism, or diglossia. Scholars have underestimated the influence the spoken form had on the written one, and they have never thought of looking for traces the disappearing variety left in the modern Greek dialects. In what follows, we make use of data of medieval and modern Greek evidence, which was till now absolutely ignored in the Phrygian studies. We can easily, when we examine the results of the research in this field, we can easily realize that attempts which are based on Indo-European etymologies usually lead us to bizarre interpretations, something that you mentioned about Italian and India. On the contrary, those based on the comparison with Greek data lead us to more reliable interpretations. In general, with some exaggeration, we can say that the only or the most certain elements are Greek loanwords or words which can easily, on the ground of phonetic, syntactic, and semantic similarities, be compared with Greek words. I gave you an example, eos and hos. Based on the acceptance of the Phrygian character of inscriptions, we can divide them into two groups. The first consists of inscriptions whose Phrygian character has been argued and now they are generally interpreted as Greek. The second group consists of inscriptions whose Phrygian character has not been argued and they are generally accepted as Phrygian inscriptions. Well, I'll show you some of these inscriptions. No. Well, alleged Phrygian inscriptions. This inscription, that is Φρούγιος Νεστοριανού Πρωτοκήτης Παρεθονόη Ορονδίο Ευχήν, is included in the corpus of Phrygian inscriptions by Haas. And as you can read, he says, Griechische Inschrift wegen der unklaren Form Parethon gelesen, Parethon aufgenommen. That is a Greek inscription which is included because of the form Parethon. But it is the criterion, then all inscriptions that contain a form that we cannot easily explain should be considered as Phrygians. The same is true for the next inscription, Gis Parthe και δίκα οχήν. There are various readings and interpretation of this inscription. As you see, Calder, followed by Kosmani, reads, Gis Parthika, Parethika, Gdika οχήν. Tsigerle reads, Gis Partheka, Δικαιο οχήν. Lamger Pastor, Tis Partheno και Δικαιο οχήν, and finally Briggs, Tis, a proper name, Partheka, Δικαιο οχήν. No matter what the right interpretation is, it is clear that nobody argues the Greek character of the inscription. The same is true for the following inscription. Ios anir venen amidea doma ninen. Wilhelm had already, some 80 years ago, read it correctly. Instead of nini aido, that is Ios venen amidea domata aido. That's simply a Greek inscription. The longest inscription belonging to this category is the inscription number 69, according to the corpus of Haas. Well, it's my fault that I have not included this inscription in the PowerPoint, so I'll read it. Ήλιος Γάιος αγοράνει αχανές τόπων και οανία πραγματικών ατόκα τη στάνη πέλτα και ελιάδη θρέψασα πριείς αυριλίαν βάσαν. Όσης της επιβιάσετε δώσει το φίσκο. Calder, Gusmani, Haas, Diakonov Nersnag, and some other scholars believe that it is a Phrygian inscription. On the contrary, Zigerle, bricks, Ariol, consider it Greek. What are the Phrygian elements in this inscription? Agorani instead of agorazi. Achanes topon instead of achani topo. Well, there is no doubt that it is a Greek inscription. But what is important, that it's the oldest monument of the modern Greek dialect of Sili. This inscription was found 10 kilometers far from Sili. And in modern Greek dialect from Sili, we found all these forms. Agorani, agorano, instead of agorazo. Topon, in the meaning of plot, as here, instead of topon, place. So, the question is, can we recognize other Greek inscriptions in the corpus of new Phrygian inscriptions? And how helpful could data from modern Greek dialects be in this attempt? In what follows, I'll try to illustrate this position by example of a preposition, and namely of the preposition as, which is recorded in the inscription number 35. It has been considered necessary to mention expressly the rejected proposals of former scholars and to quote extensively from them in order to show the paths investigation in this subject have followed. The preposition ex and ek is recorded in medieval and modern Greek dialects in the following forms. You can read it. With a vocalism, e, ek, ex, ek, es. With o vocalism, o, ok, ox, og, og. Og will be important for the reading of Phrygian inscriptions. With the vocalism, ik, ix, is. With a vocalism, ak, ax, ag, as, and as. As Kapsomenos has shown, the form as is derived from s, that is x, with the change ea, which we find also in par x, par ax, ekkopin, akkopin. That is also the same preposition. Let us now, well, it's important because this preposition will help us to interpret a so-called New Phrygian inscription. Well, we see, Ios nisaka kun eda ke manka, that is the protasis, we are not interested. He who inflicts harm to this tomb. Then we have asankaioi pantai kenanoi. Ramsey, who was the first to try to translate, to interpret this inscription, read Agan, Ankaoi, Pandakenanun. He thought that in Pandakenai we have the word Akena, which he translated as food, and thought that Pandakena means all provider. Calder, a few years later, wrote rightly, any attempt at the interpretation would be for that time the merest fantasy. Many years later, Hans offers two important readings. He recognizes in Ananka the Greek loans Ananka and Pandakena. According to him, the inscription is half Grecian, and he offers the following translation. Uskve atanangin ea Pandakena sundo. The last to deal with this inscription is Ariol, 97, who actually accepts has proposal. Now, let's examine the apodosis of this inscription. We have E, a Greek pronoun, dative of the personal pronoun. Πάντα κενά, two Greek words. Ananga, a Greek word. As, a medieval Greek preposition meaning ex. As ananga is exactly the Greek medieval ex anagis, which means immediately. So we have an inscription who has as Greek, ananga Greek, e Greek, panda Greek, kena Greek, and then we have a verbal form of unknown origin. Ariol proposes three etymologies for the verb inu. Well, as it is known, the imperative third plural was often replaced by the subjunctive. The form inu actually represents the third plural of the subjunctive. It is based on the third singular any, which gave the above-mentioned form after having been revalued as a verbal form. We have exactly the same formation in the Hellenistic form enusin, which comes from the third singular any. But what is important is that the third plural inu is used today in the dialect of Sili, which we mentioned and which we said that is some kilometers far from this. So there is no doubt that it's a Greek inscription. The verbal form inu is also attested in the inscription number 71. You can see it. Well, this is the explanation as ananga Greek dialect form, which corresponds exactly to medieval Greek ex anagis immediately. There's a problem of coordination, as you understand, but I show you it later. Inscription 71 has tis kegeret eti tetikmeni inu. En sagt, der Plural nach Sätzen mit tostis ως της Ankan ist auch griechisch üblich. Ariol proposes a different segmentation, and he says, T is a particle, but he adds, unusual in the beginning of the sentence, is nominative singular pronoun, a variant of ios, que conjunctive, egeret, third plural imperfect, wake up, excited, dit, and so weiter. So. Well, there is no doubt that the protasis is Greek. There is not a single New Frisian inscription in which the relative clause is introduced by the pronoun tis. On the contrary, it is normally used in this fashion in Greek inscription of this period. As to the verbal form egeret, Ariol reads instead of to egeren, that is, tis kegeren tetikmeni inu. That is, we have a Greek protasis, an apodosis with a Greek verb, and then we have tetikmeni, which we'll see that it is also a Greek form. So we have another Greek inscription. So, in what follows, we'll examine prepositional phrases with ex, which are combined with the word ευχή. The word ευχή is recorded in a Greek loan in the inscription 8, in the phrase ευχήν άργου, which corresponds the Greek ευχής ένεκεν. According to Haas, you can read it, άργου means merito, and it is related with Old Irgian arc has value, price, Greek alphi produce gain. Diakonov and Nerzak think that it is an adverbialized genitive of argos, sense unknown, in the role of a postposition construed with the accusative. Bayun and Ariol later read, for the sake of, beginning with, connecting with Greek archi. The whole phrase is Greek or borrowed from Greek. Well, there's no doubt that the whole phrase is Greek or borrowed Greek. Greek argo is an adverbialized genitive of argon, that is ergon in the meaning causa. The word is usually recorded in medieval and modern Greek dialects in prepositional phrases, exergu, xergu, xargu, axargu on purpose, and energo, nergo on purpose, that gives the Albanian nergot on purpose. What is important here is the change of A to A. This change is recorded in different periods of the Greek language. I give you some Hellenistic examples, eti, ati, eteke, eteka, en, an, tefsi, and so on. The development is very often in Greek dialects, especially in unloud, eknifos, agnifos, I don't read it. Especially frequent is this development in the dialect of Pharasa, Methoporon, Mathoporon, and so weiter. Maratha is, Pharasa is in the old Phrygian region. Now, we have already mentioned that one of the phonological characteristics of Phrygian was the change of long E to A. But the same change we find in Cyprian, where we have the long word kepia as kapia. And we have also other examples of ancient Cypriot, which have the evolution E-A. In two inscriptions, the word Efki, or better its variant Efkos, are recorded in the Phrygian or Phrygianite form Avgo. It's not clear, no, I'll give you immediately. We have this inscription. Ξεύνη τάνιξα οικοδάμ πρώτης εσταμέναν μάνκανα μίας κτλ. And you can read the translation. Stranger, behold the tomb standing before. Oh, it's impossible. This is Calder's reading. Then I showed you Haas reading. Ξεύνη hagtum viva posit. There is no agreement between these. And then we have Ariol, ξεύνη τάνιξα. Afterwards, for Xena Amias put on the board. In order to realize the differences between the interpretations offered by these scholars, I'll give you an example. We have the sequence, Tanixa au Kodan. Calder reads, Tanixa, aorist imperative of a verb meaning behold. Ikodan, accusative of a no-stem word iko meaning top. Has, tanix, hang. Tan, hang, x, a nonsense. Aukodan, Liebenzeit. There is nothing common between these explanations. And later, Ariol, ixa. Later, afterwards, the source seems to be exis, or rather, it's supposed for exa, ipsodan, identical with Greek ipsotha, ipsothen, with psili, etc. Well, in Greek inscription of this period, we find very frequently the prepositional phrase εξευχής and εξεύκος. So we can easily recognize in ξεύνη τάνε, εξ αύκο, the form εξεύχους. Than is tan, the fluctuation that is regular. Πρώτη is ταμέναν, πρώτη is a Greek adverb. Εσταμέναν is Greek. Manka is also Greek. What is amasianio? Ama, they read ami, and they say amias. But it's not amias, it's ama asianion arnardonikanos. That is, ταν ξεύνας, την ξεύνη, εξευχής. Ταν πρωτοίης, τα μέναν, μάνκαν, άμα ασιανίο. What is Asianion? Asianion is a part of the tomb. Her husband, Dorikanos. So it's a Greek inscription without any problems. Now, the next inscription is the longest non-formularized inscription. We'll just read Calder's, how many minutes?
The limits, minutes, what discussion?
How many minutes?
Say, a couple of minutes.
Well, Calder reads, Enimados ξεύνη επήραρε. And he translates, Ξεύνα, daughter of Enimado. Has reads, Είναι αμδούς. And translates, Hank mdu, ξεύνη, and mdu thinks it's a Lydian long word and compares with Lydian mru stele. Well, because we have not time to discuss extensively, as I'd like, all the proposed interpretations, we'll come to the final interpretation that proposed by me, and we'll see. Well, it is actually Ενημάδους ξεύνη. Ξεύνη, the daughter of Enimas. Enimas is a parallel form to Onimas. Enima is a parallel form of Onyma. Ξεύνε. Pirar is Orion, but we can see Pirar, Peras, Orion. In the Hesigios find Orion, Τύχισμα φραγμών. Then we have Opaden, that is offered, supported, and that this word was used in this area is verified by Opaston Ephodion Pergei. So, we have Ήνιμαδος ξεύνη, πήραρ όπαδε, ατόκ νούμανη, η ξεύνη κόρη ενημάδος, εφοδίασεν φράγμα, τύχισμα, ατόκνουμε at this tome, μάνι, εκυρό, Ιον ούσο ερήτωμεν. Ιον ούτως ερήτωμεν, πα τε δεουσίας παρ της διώσεως. Ερήτωμεν των τάφων παρ της διώσεως. From the destruction. Οκ μάνις δάδονκε, οκ αυγή. Οκ is a phonetic variant of X, as we said, and αυγή is the Phrygianized form of εύχος, as we saw. X εύχος. Then we have maybe. Ίωσα κακούν έδακεν μάκα, τόσνη ζως και πεις. There are many proposals impossible to explain peace, but it is easy to understand what that means if we bring in mind that there were zos had as a synonym επιγής and nekros enerthegis υπόγειης. So, zos και pis is nothing else than zos και πηγής. A synonym from zon. Τετικμένος ήτο. Well, I'll tell you in a few words. Well, as I told you, this paper is based on a monograph. So it was impossible to present you a monograph in a few minutes. But till now we saw that some of the very important for the interpretation, for the establishment of the phonology, of the morphology of Phrygian, very important inscriptions, the non-formalized inscriptions, proved to be Greek. You can believe me that the rest also of these so-called New Phrygian inscriptions are Greek. So we could say, well, it is clear, the non-formalized Phrygian inscriptions were in a Greek dialect, but the formalized, which were easy to remember, were in what we call Phrygian. But actually it is not the case. The formularized inscriptions are easy to interpret as Greek. If we have 2 minutes, I'll give you only an example. There is a famous malediction formula, Ίος νικ νήμα κακούτ άδακεν, βέκος άκαλος, τι δέγρουν ήτο. Till now, we tried, all scholars tried to interpret ákalos. And they said, vekos, ákalos, vekos is bread, ákalos is water. And they tried to interpret ákalos as water. And they related it with aqua and some impossible prepositions. So the solution is very simple. Ákalos means in Greek, and it is registered in Etymologicum Magnum, pikros, bitter. That is, vekos ákalos ήτο. Ο άρτος έστω πικρός. Τι δρέγρουν έτι δε υγρών. Where υγρών is a substantivized form of υγρών είδωρ, exactly as νερόν comes from νερόν είδωρ. So the result is that the so-called New Phrygian inscriptions are written in a Greek dialect. It is an Achaean dialect. I'll just have an archaic Greek dialect. The interpretation of the so-called New Phrygian inscriptions leads us to the conclusion that they are written in a Greek dialect, in an Achaean dialect. Some of the peculiarities, most of them common with Parthelia, should be attributed to Anatolian influence. Problems of historical, blah, blah. Common features with Cyprian, Cypriot, Arcadian, and Pamphylian. Phonetic, neutralization of the opposition OU in final position. Weak articulation and loss of the final nasal. Weak articulation and loss of rho, onsen. Paratis, patis, we mentioned it. Patithomen, partithomen, Cypriot. Morphological. Genitive verbs, particle ni, third aorist, epies, edaes, and we have only one form in Achaean, the Arcadian epies is on epiesen. Preposition post, pros, syntactic. Dative with ex apo. As anangai. Ex and dative. That is a typical Achaean feature. Lexical, I just mentioned some of them. Mona, tomb, which is also Cyprian. Vekos, bread, which is also Cyprian. Inis, son, which is also Cyprian, and so on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for this extremely interesting and promising paper. I hope you have understanding that we have wait a little far away of the borders of our time, but this brings the inconvenience that we have practically no time for questions. Maybe we can ask 1 or 2 questions, 1 minute each, so to say. Or 1 question 2 minutes long. Please, Emilio.
Very much a suggestion, a question, but a suggestion. I found convincing your explanations of the inscriptions that you have given. But with these last 2 slides concerning to the classification of the Greek dialect, I would be not so happy with them. So my suggestion would be to separate the interpretation of the decipherment of the text from the classification of the Greek dialect that results of the inscriptions you have deciphered.
Well, you must know, I presented a part of the work, so there are many other elements which maybe would change your opinion about the times.
Thank
you. Yeah. Well, I would say really, I assume that your research will be more than welcome at this point, yeah? And I share the same structure as Emilio, as to make the difference between what is medieval Greek and what you assume to be a part of the stock for all Phrygian, yeah? But the thing remains really promising, yeah? Even if you think of the presence of lavagetas also there, yeah? Which can hardly be another thing that Mycenaean too, yeah? So, well, really promising, yeah? Also, well, I don't want to provoke you, because we have to hear Emilio Crespo.
Because there is a solution.
Mm-hmm. Well, also it would be a nice idea if we deal one time with Phrygian again, and soon, yeah? Thank you very much. Well, and now it is my pleasure to present my colleague Emilio Crespo from Madrid, which will speak about Macedonian, and this is actually more than welcome. This is one of the highlights of this meeting. Yeah. Well.
After having attended to the previous lecture, which has made in a convincing way what a linguist tries always to do, and it is to decipher and to translate texts, I'm obliged to come to the other more humble position of commenting upon texts. I have to tell you at the beginning that my exposition is divided into 2 very different parts. The first one is something like a general presentation of the Macedonian texts in the ancient world, and this part hopes to be very understandable for all of us. And the second part is more a technical discussion about one of the most important features of the Macedonian Greek dialect. And at this second point, I'm going to sing a palinodi, and I hope to bring some water to Mr. Hatsopoulos Milos. The present paper gives an overview of the languages and dialects directly or indirectly attested in the ancient kingdom of Macedon, from the first documentary evidence in the 5th century BC to the end of the 4th century. Most documents come from the 4th century, and only a few of them are relevant to give a final answer to what at the time was the contentious issue of the nature of the Macedonian speech before the reign of Philip II. During the last decades of the 20th century, archaeological research in the ancient kingdom of the Temenidae made great advances. Many archaeological sites were excavated or explored, and many documents were found and published. Among other things, such discoveries and investigations settled the bitter question of the ancient Macedonian language almost in a definitive manner. In the absence of new documents that have a significance comparable to that of the singular discovery of the curse tablet found in Pella in 1986, I will limit myself to listing the Greek dialects attested in the ancient kingdom of Macedonia before the emergence of the Attic Jonic Koine, and this is my second part, to draw in a fine-grained description of the most important question concerned with the phonology of the Macedonian Greek dialect. In both parts, I will be elaborating researches carried out by Briggs, Dubois, Hatsopoulos, Masson, Panayotou, and Julian Mendez-Osuna, among others. Depending on the material, let's pass to the nature of the evidence. Depending on the material used for writing and on the way the texts have come down to us, the documentary evidence concerned with the languages and dialects spoken in the ancient kingdom of Macedonia falls into two categories. A first group consists of monetary legends and epigraphic documents carved or painted on stone, scratched on sheets of lead, or engraved on gold lamellae or on other materials. They date from the 5th century onwards and have come down to us in a direct manner. Also, there is a literary text, the so-called Derveni Papyrus, which was found within a funerary monument close to Thessaloniki and which contains a philosophical treatise in the form of an allegorical commentary to an Orphic poem that related the birth of the gods. And this document also belongs to this group by its date, the mid-4th century, and by the place of the discovery. And the second group has been transmitted through medieval manuscripts, and it consists of notices, of glosses, and of mythological, personal, and place names quoted by literary authors. The two outstanding features of this material, the most prominent features of the linguistic situation during the period we are concerned with, is that all the surviving evidence is written in Greek, regardless of whatever may be meant by the stray allusions to the spoken Macedonian, and independently of the interpretation of a number of glosses, which apparently are not understandable as Greek. A second remarkable feature is that the documents found in the ancient kingdom of Macedonia display a high dialectal diversity. And this is very different to what happens in the rest of the Greek areas, where what we find normally is some time of uniformity in each area. And this is very different in the area of Macedonia. What we found here is North Jonic in the Euboean colonies, Insular Jonic in the colonies dispatched by the Cycladic Islands, Attic in the cities that were members of the Delicatic League, Corinthian in Potidea, and Attic Jonic Koine especially. And I would to add that a brief mention to the new texts from Metone, dated in the last third of the 8th century BC. They are in particular relevant for the early history and spread of the Greek alphabet and for the origins of the archaic lyric, since one of the inscriptions attests for a fragment of what seems to be a iambic verse. The Derbeni papyrus, as I have said, is written in Ionic with an Attic overlay. This was the situation up to the 86. This year, that year, in 1986, the great number of inscriptions had been found in many places of the ancient Macedonian state, and an intense work of edition had been carried out in the previous decades. But all the documents were dated after the beginning of the Koine, of the Attic Ionic Koine. For this reason, there was a widely spread view that there didn't exist proper Macedonian documents of early date, but only texts brought there from somewhere else. The majority of the epigraphic documents found in the ancient kingdom of Macedon can be dated from the beginning of the 4th century onwards and are written in the Attic Ionic Koine, or are strongly influenced by it. Under such circumstances, researchers had to rely on ancient sources in order to find out notices about the original Macedonian speech. Nevertheless, the account given by the ancient sources is contradictory and very controversial. But according to Herodotus, the Macedonian kings were Greek. But insofar as Macedonians are listed by Thucydides and Aristotle among other barbarian peoples, the king would have reigned over a non-Greek population. And in fact, Socrates, in speech intended to persuade Philip II to take on the leadership of the Greeks, states that the king was the only Greek who deemed it worthy. The Greek text is on number 1 of the handout. Deemed it worthy to rule a people who were not of the same race. As you know, Demosthenes and other authors stressed that not only the Macedonians, but also the king were not Greeks. Other modern authors couldn't believe that Euripides, Aton, Gorgias, and others could have lived there, composed and played tragedies there, if the king and his court didn't speak Greek. As for the attacks of Demosthenes against Philip as a barbarian, they have to be taken as mere abuses, which, by the way, are contradicted by the fact that the king took part in the Olympic Games. And now we come to the year 1986, when the first really monument of the Macedonian dialect was found, and it was the Pella Course tablet, which was published in 1993. This Course tablet is scratched on a sheet of lead. It is written in the Milesian alphabet and has been dated in the 2nd quarter of the 5th century BC. The content of its 9 inscribed lines is a magical curse that a woman in love addresses against the eventual marriage of a man called Dionysophon with a woman called Thetima. Its main dialectal features are listed on the page 1 of the handout. They are first compensatory lengthening, retention of long A, contraction of A-O into A as in Doric, opening of E and U, epheresis of EO, assimilation in Ginomai, merger of A and E, fricativization of The, voicing, and this is the feature I will discuss at the second part of my talk. If Dapina is to be understood as Tapeina, and in morphology, genitive singular of masculine A, temas stems are of the masculine nouns, plural dative daimosi, singular dative for the first person, a pronoun emin, temporal verbs and conjunctions in ka, and apocope of a. This is the list of the dialectal features we find in the course tablet of Pella. This tablet revealed a new dialect of Ancient Greek. Its dialectal features don't coincide with any other dialect known so far, and it has no trace of influence of the Attic Ionic Koine. The Law of Defixio provides a new form of Northwest Doric and has no parallel in the literary dialects. The course tablets known so far are all written in the local dialect of the place where they were found, and there is no reason to think that this tablet doesn't conform to the rule. Since the Pella course tablet displays a combination of dialectal features that differ from all other local or literary dialects, the possibility is excluded of its being written in some other dialectal area and then brought to Pella. Being exclusively attested in ancient Macedonia, this dialect can be rightly called Macedonian. It's as poorly and lately documented as, for instance, the Pamphylian dialect, of which García Ramón mentioned this morning. But there is no doubt about its condition of being a Greek dialect. Moreover, some of the features of the course tablet of Pella are confirmed as Macedonian by glosses. I've referred to some of them, to the opening of I and U, which is also confirmed by some glosses I've quoted there, and also the voicing of T, D, which is confirmed by two Attic inscriptions which mention the members of the Macedonians who saw a treaty between Perdiccas II and the Attic state, and also by some other more recent inscriptions where Digaya, interpreted as Dikaya, is mentioned. So these are at least three features confirmed by glosses. Of the new fragments, or the new documents found after the Pella course tablet, I would say that all of them are written or strongly influenced by Attic Ionic, and therefore there is no question to go into the discussion of them. And now we will pass to the second part of my talk, concerned some of the new documents coming from Macedonia are quoted in on the numbers 3, 4, and 5 of the handout. One of them comes from a tablet from Dodona, according to the interpretation of Julián Méndez Osuna. And now we come to the second part of my talk, as I said, concerned with the spellings, special spellings of the consonants in the Macedonian documents. Macedonian inscriptions from the 4th century BC onwards attest occasional spellings of beta, delta, or gamma, where the other Greek dialects have phi, theta, or chi, respectively. Instances of B for phi are more frequent, but there are also cases of the other voiced plosives. The feature is so frequent that it seems to constitute a Macedonian shibboleth, namely a distinguishing practice that is indicative of one's social or regional origin. Some epigraphic instances of voiced plosives for the phonetic result of the Indo-European aspirates are mentioned in number 6. They come from inscriptions, the 4 lines, the first 4 lines, Bernica, Berenike, Keba, Bulomaga, and Bila, Bilista. Others come from anamorphic gold lamella, and this is Bulomaga. Other documents come from ancient quotations of literary authors. This is the case of Philippos, Berenica, Ferenica, Beroya, Ferona, according to Herodian. In the following line, there are some quotations coming from literary authors from Alexandria. And this is quite interesting because this could lead us to think that the first Alexandrians had kept something like a memory of distinguishing features of Macedonian or the Macedonian dialect. And it's curious that some of them come from Callimachus, others from Euphorion and Nicander. Others are later, such as the case of Plutarch, Ugar antitu F to beta Horontai. I read not with the Erasmian pronunciation, the ancient Greek. Delphoi, Kathaper Macedones, Bilipon, Kai Balakron, Kai Beroniken, Legontes, Allantitu P. And there is also a more arguable example of Stathmeas, which could be related to Stathmos. And in this case, we would have a new case of delta instead of theta. And finally, if the name of the middle Boibe represents Phoibe, it should be a new case. For these spellings, which are special and only attested in the area of Macedonia, there have been some different interpretations. And we are now turning to number 7 on the handout. The most ancient interpretation, and it was the most repeated view, that goes back to Paul Kretschmer, is that these cases show that Macedonian was not a Greek language. And because the Indo-European inherited aspirates would have been developed into voiced plosives. This hypothesis is absolutely clearly erroneous. As pointed out by Panayotou, to my mind, the first who pointed that, a voiced plosive stands for the corresponding inherited voiced aspirates only sporadically. The result of the treatment of the Indo-European aspirates in Macedonian inscription is generally spelled with phi, theta, or he. And there are many, many examples. So spellings with beta, delta, or gamma instead of phi, theta, or he for the inherited voiced aspirates occur only sporadically and are far from being the result of an unconditioned sound law. Nor is the development of the aspirates to voiced plosives conditioned by a given phonetic environment or by the date or the geographic origin of the document. Rather, it's probably a sociolinguistic pattern that explains its occasional occurrence. The second hypothesis I am going to mention was put forward by Briggs Panayotou in 1994, and then you can find it, for example, in the history of the Greek language edited by Christidis. Briggs and Panayotou have suggested that the spellings with a voiced plosive show that Macedonian assimilated vocabulary place names and personal names from populations who inhabited Macedonia but spoke an Indo-European language in which the inherited aspirates lost their aspiration. The historical Macedonians would have been the result of the fusion of two linguistic groups. The one spoke a Greek dialect akin to the Northwest dialects, which was used down to the end of the Hellenistic period, and the other spoke a variety of Frisian. As Professor Tsitsilis has just said, Frisian were supposed to be to the north of the Balkan Peninsula up to the end of the first millennium BC, and then they moved to the Anatolian settlements. So, if this hypothesis were true, the fact would be that all the instances we could find of beta, or the use of beta, delta, and gamma in the Macedonian texts should conform to the rule of the relative chronology of the sound laws in Greek. But, as you can see on number 7.2 on the handout, Hatsopoulos called the attention to two names, Betalos and Kebalinos, which show that these names, these personal names, have a form which has to be necessarily post-Mycenaean, because in the case of Betalos, although we don't know its etymology, we can be certain that the combination of the forms Thetalos and Petsalos in Attic and Thessalian respectively suggests that this word, that the first phoneme of this word was treated at the same time when the inherited Indo-European labiovellars were treated in Greek when they were followed by E. So, the relative chronology of the treatment of Betalos, which explains the form Betalos, implies a sequence as shown on numbers 1, 2, and 3 at the bottom of page 2. The first sound law is the devoicing of the inherited voiced aspirates inherited from Indo-European. Then comes the post-Mycenaean laws of the inherited labiovellars before E, and we are certainly that is a post-Mycenaean treatment because in Mycenaean we have a special signs for the labiovellars, almost in all cases. And at the third point of the order would come the occasional use of beta, delta, gamma for phi, what demonstrates that the form betalos should be post-Mycenaean and therefore after the supposed chronology of the migration of the Frisians from the north of the Balkan Peninsula to the Anatolian country. A similar reasoning can be reached by examining the form Kebalinos, which is also a personal name, and which suppose the chronological order as shown at the top of the page 3 of the handout. The inherited form would be kepel. After that, we have to put the pre-Mycenaean devoicing of aspirates, according to which we should have kefal, kepal, and then the post-Mycenaean dissimilation of aspirates, the so-called Grassmann's law, to which Professor Mayberger referred, according to which we should have kepal, and then the partial phonetic assimilation or the special characteristic of Macedonian kevalinos. The conclusion is again the same. The form kevalinos has to be dated after the Mycenaean period, so after the time of the supposed migration of the Phrygians to the Anatolian Peninsula. And now we come to number 7.3, which I called the free categorization hypothesis. Hatsopoulos argues that the spellings beta, delta, and gamma for phi, the, and he, respectively, in Macedonian inscriptions written in Koine and in glosses attributed to Macedonian, show that the voiceless aspirates and the voiced plosives became fricatives at an early date. This is this is quoted under 7.3. The spellings beta, delta, and gamma would reflect the development of the voiceless aspirates into voiceless fricatives. And the parallel shift of the voiced plosives into voiced fricatives. That's why I put number 3 under 7.3, the line fricativization of voiced plosives between brackets, because we have only indirect evidence for this sound law. We lack evidence, as I said, for the Esperantization of the voiced plosives, and this is the reason why such a development appears between brackets on the handout. Furthermore, spellings such as tapina for tapeina that we have seen above would also point to the voicing of the voiceless plosives and of the aspirated plosives already in the 4th century or even earlier. In other words, the spellings beta, delta, gamma for phi, theta, he, and the spellings of the type tapina would be accounted for by the sound laws represented in 7.3 on the handout. I will explain below the numbers a bit strange in front of the sound laws referred to. The first line you see begins with number 2, is not a mistake, at least in this case it's not a mistake. The second line begins by number 3, and the other 2 changes are not numbered. The Hatsopoulos hypothesis presents the advantage of accounting for the spellings we encounter and of giving an internal account of the data. But it has 2 apparent drawbacks. It presupposes an early date for the fricativization of the plosives, a change taken to have spread in the 1st century BC. And it is true that there are in other dialects spellings that are probably to be accounted for as results of an early fricativization, but such cases are not as frequent as they would be in Macedonian. And the further disadvantage, quotations, is the fact that the voicing of the voiceless plosives is unknown in classical Greek. Even in standard modern Greek, voiceless plosive only became voiced after nasal, as in Antonios instead of Antonios. Hatsopoulos, with the support of Mendetosuna, have adduced parallels from other languages. the combination of fricativization and voicing of plosives reminds, at least to a speaker of a Latin language, the change shift that the inherited Latin plosives suffered in the Western Romance languages, probably after 270. And this is the new point I would try to put forward before you. We are pretty sure that the changes in the Western Romance languages I'm going to refer from now on can be dated after 270 because Romanian has no trace of them, and Romanian was abandoned by the Roman Empire in 270. So we are pretty sure that the changes I'm going to refer from now on are dated after the middle of the 3rd century BC. And this argument, according to this argument, the Western Romance languages, which are the Romance languages spoken to the north of Italy, to the north of Tuscany, not Tuscany, to the north of it, and then France, Catalan, Spanish, Galician, and Portuguese, all of them conform more or less to the same rule. So we have plenty of possibilities to check the theory. What we find is a chain shift that is presented under number 7-4. And in this case, we are pretty sure of the order of changes. At least we are pretty sure of the order of numbers 2 and 3, which are exactly the same cases, the same sound laws that we would find in Macedonian, and which were numbered as 2 and 3 on my handout on number 7-3. And that's why I used these numbers 2 and 3, because I am referring to the same sound laws. According to Martinet's theory, in the Économie des changements phonétiques, the pulling sound law would have been number 1, geminated voiceless plosives became simple voiceless plosives. Kuppa develops into koppa. Then the empty case is filled by the voicing of voiceless plosives between vowels. According to that, scopa develops into escoba, and this is the Spanish word. Aratum develops into arado, arado. We pronounce arado with fricative. But this change doesn't happen in initial. And we have pratum, prado. I'm referring to the initial P. And then number 3 is the fricativization and loss, in some cases, of voiced process between vowels. And we have badum, badum, which evolves to bado, do, in Spanish, and regalem, which can be easily understood for a supporter of the real, which develops into real with the dropping of the g. But this change doesn't affect at the beginning of the word. And bene, we have kept bien. So the order of 2 and 3 coincides, and that's surprising, with the order supposed by Hatzopoulos for the changes in Macedonian. We can represent this change shift in Western Roman languages as shown in on the table under number 7-4. Double P develops into P. Into its turn, P develops into B, plosive, and B develops into V, fricative or into the labiodental fricative. In the same way, double T develops into T develops into D develops into the, or vanishes. And then double K develops into K into G into G or Y, and in some cases vanishes. This chain shift is due, and all the theories are in agreement, due to the lesser articulatory strength of plosives between vowels. And there comes another point. This area, the area of the Romance, or the Western Romance languages, coincides more or less with the area of the Celtic substratum. And as you know, I have to confess that I don't know any Celtic at all, but at least I have heard of a very famous word that is Celtic lenition. And the Celtic lenition is the weakening of the plosives, especially the weakening of the plosives between vowels, also at the beginning of the word. So, I would say that this can lead us to suppose also a chain shift in Macedonian, and this chain shift is presented in number 75 of the handout. According to this presentation, P would develop into B, or plosive, stop, and B into V, in the same way T into the, T into D, and D into the, and finally K into G, G into G. I have to confess that at the second part of my presentation of the chain, or the supposed chain shift in Macedonian, I'm not so happy with that, because I would prefer to put only P developed into Phi, T developed into theta, and K developed into He. But for the moment, I'm not sure about the third column, and that's why I prefer to put it here, so that I could hear your suggestions about that. If we discard the third column, we could find a very good example to explain a fact that what we find in Macedonian is that instead of Phi, we find beta. But what we don't find at all is, instead of beta, Phi. If the pronunciation of both phonemes were the same, we could expect cases of mistakes and cases of ultracorrection. That's why I would prefer to discard the third column of the most at the right part of my presentation of the chain shift in Macedonian. This is quite, let me say, quite elegant, because we use the parallels of the Western Romance languages to explain a series of difficult sound laws we have to suppose for Macedonian. But we have to confess that that's not the whole story. In the case of the Romance languages, the Western Romance languages, as we saw, the changes didn't affect the beginning of the word. I called your attention to pratum and to bene, bien. And this is not the case with the Macedonian examples we have. Because of the 4 cases we have, three of them, I think, come to at the initial of a word. We have bordinos instead of portinos. And we have dapina instead of tapeina. And the only case that doesn't conform to, to what we would expect is the Gaia instead of the Kaya. And this is between vowels, not at the beginning of the word. But that's a problem, and I don't know. So, however, in spite of that, this hypothesis, let's say, Hatzopoulos' hypothesis raises at least 3 questions. It presupposes an earlier chronology for fricativization and voicing of plosives than in the other Greek dialects. It involves the voicing of plosives, a development which had been aborted and lacks of trace even in Standard Modern Greek, and the parallels adduced in the Western Romance languages have offered striking similarities but also differences. I hope to have contributed to mitigate the last 2 drawbacks of Hatzopoulos' hypothesis. For the second disadvantage, the development which has been aborted and lacks of trace even in Standard Modern Greek, we could adduce the fact that the Macedonian dialect died suddenly in the middle of in the course of its development and couldn't reach the final step we should have expected. And in the case of the parallels, although there are some other problems, I hope to have contributed just with a small glass of water to Hatzopoulos' meal, showing that there are strong similarities between the changes and the order of the changes between Macedonian and some of the Western Romance languages. That is the point I have to keep on working on, because it needs much more working, especially with the Italian, North Italian languages where there are many problems. And my last point would be that we mentioned the fact that the area where we have the Western Roman languages coincides with the area of the Celtic substratum. So I deplore to say that in the case of Macedonian fricativization theory doesn't imply that their internal explanation of the phonological facts doesn't imply that there is no substratum or there is no adstratum. And in this case, we could explain rather easily mentions of the ancient sources which stress the fact that Macedonian was almost ununderstandable for the rest of the Greeks. And it would be a rather convenient solution to mix up together the 2 theories, an internal explanation and a support given by an adstratum language. So, I hope to have offered you in the 2 parts of my talk, first of all, something like a general picture of the documents written in this area where we are now. Some of them was occupied by Thracians, Illyrians, and other peoples of whom we are certainly that they didn't speak Greek. And in the second part of my talk, I hope to have been a bit creative and to have contributed to the development of the research into the future. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for this extremely interesting and this delightful paper. And I assume that nobody of us have regret that we have a little bit on the border of the time. Well, we have time for questions. Sopoulos?
Makute? Yeah. Okay. First, I wish to thank you and say how grateful I am for your contribution, because you have improved some ideas that I have had in the past, and I'm really very thankful for that. Very quickly, I should like to draw attention to the danger of not examining very carefully historical sources, because these historical sources, such as Thucydides, Aristotle, or Socrates, I mean generally literary sources, have been used by linguists without really going to the detail. For instance, Thucydides never calls the Macedonians barbarians. If you read carefully, you will see that he draws a distinction between Greeks, who are Greeks from the colonies in the Macedonian area, or Greeks coming from southern Greece, Macedonians and barbarians, and some barbarians. Same thing in Isocrates. And both Isocrates and Thucydides do not draw these distinctions on a linguistic basis. So they're irrelevant from the linguistic point of view.
Exactly. Yeah.
Second thing, there is a case well attested in the 4th century where we have a phi instead of a beta. Bephaios. So it's not unattested. And as far as the beginning of the word is concerned, well, it is there, and it occurs already in the 4th century. In the catalogue of the priests of Asclepios coming from Kalindoia in Macedonia, we have the form Gydias with a gamma, and we have a few years later, in the end of the 4th century, an inscription from Cassandria, in the same general area, with the form Kydias. So it is a fact. It is there from the 4th century and have to explain somewhere. I wouldn't say that this sonorization of simple plosives does not occur in modern Greek dialects. It occurs in a certain way. I suppose that Anna can explain it better than I. In the modern Cypriot dialect, which, for instance, a Cypriot born in London who wants to transcribe Greek words into Latin script, he says Kyprios, he writes Kyprios with a G in the beginning. I mean, for us, yes, for us modern Greeks, when we hear, speaking standard modern Greek, hearing a Cypriot, we make automatically the adjustment, and we think it's a K, but it's a funny sort of K, which a Cypriot living in London transcribes by a G. And finally, I didn't know, you said that these ancient Macedonian was understandable or was not understandable?
Not understandable.
I'm not as sure as that. I mean, if you have, we take the example of the Pella curse, it's difficult to understand why it would be less understandable than Pamphylian. Pamphylian is much more strange to the Greek ear, or even Cypriot, ancient Cypriot, than this sort of dialectal Greek. And perhaps it's again, we have Curtius Rufus, but we don't know how many different people have interfered with the narrative of the trial of Philotas. There was something there, probably. There was some question of dialect and standard Greek, but I'm not so sure that it was so important as that. I mean, it's a late and passage which reads interpretation.
The second passage, which says, in order to be understood, facilius. This is the expression. So there are two conflicting passages of the same Curtius.
Anyway, I want to thank you again and say how happy I am that I've made this significant contribution to the understanding of this.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for your. I have to answer some of the points. I don't remember at the moment what was exactly what Thucydides says, but Anna Panayotou reminded that Thucydides says Macedonians and barbarians. Let's say, in this passage, both of them are coordinated. The names of both of them are coordinated. I don't remember exactly the passage, but I'm quite confident that the impression that one gains when reading the text has the idea that there are some relation between barbarians and Macedonians. Maybe that is not linguistic, but
Macedonian cavalry, Greek hoplites, and a lot of barbarian robbers.
Yeah, in the case of Isocrates, I have to say that it's very important, the case that this text, I quoted in number 1, is within a speech given to advise Philip to take on the leadership of the Greeks. So it's difficult to imagine that when the orator is trying to convince Philippus, is going to say something that doesn't that couldn't like to him.
He's not trying to convince Philip. Philip was convinced. He's trying to convince the Athenians to accept Philip. And that's why he says that Philip is a nice guy who would never act as a king towards the Greeks.
Yeah.
He acts as a king with the Macedonians. And the distinction between Macedonia and Greece is the same as the distinction between Russia and Germany. Germany was not within the Holy Roman Empire. Prussia, was not within the Holy Roman Empire. Was not part of Germany. And even in the 19th century, Mendelssohn makes a distinction between Germans and Russians. He sees in Naples and says there are many Germans and there are many Russians and German good painters.
Yeah, yeah.
You have to see the things in context.
Yeah. With respect to Befaios, I would like to add to your point that you are more competent, of course, in this type of data, but according to what you say in one of your publications, Befaios is attested in Amphipolis, 4th century, more or less middle 4th century, and we have to remind that Amphipolis was conquered by Philip 357. So that would say that Befaios was attested at a time when Amphipolis didn't belong to the Macedonian kingdom. Yeah.
And you have the names. It is after the conquest. First, because the names are Macedonian, typically Macedonian, and second, because the amount is not in drachmas, it's in golden status.
Yeah.
So it's certainly after not only the conquest, but a few years after the conquest, and partly colonization of Amphipolis by Macedonians from the Old Kingdom.
Yeah. Yeah, in any case, it's only 4 years after the only 4 years after the conquer.
But the people who buy and sell are Macedonians.
Yeah. But the people who were there were mainly Euboeans,
Yes.
maybe some of them, well, probably of Attic dialect or Koine. So the thing is that, to my mind, the case of Bephaios is open to debate. That is why I didn't mention it. Okay. No, even agreeing with the theory that there is this, that there is voicing of the, but that would be the only case of ultra-correction, in any case. What is absolutely...
There's a beginning in everything.
Yeah. And with respect to modern Greek dialects, I was careful enough to say standard modern Greek.
That's true. Yeah.
Not Greek dialects. And thank you very much for that.
Is there further questions? Well, in this case, I will give myself the word for a short remark. Thank you very much for the exciting paper. Yeah, I assume that we can quietly renounce to give too much value for linguistics to what Isocrates others say, you know. So we remember that according to Plutarchus, Latin was an Aeolian dialect, yeah, and well, and also the concept of Greek in Isocrates is not only genetic, but cultural and so on. Well, so just a couple of points. I would say that actually you don't need to invoke Celtic substratum at this point once you have established that there is a chain according to the dynamics of the system. You don't need this, yeah? And apart from this, lenition is not only Celtic. We have also 2 rules of lenition in Hittite, and yeah, the internal mechanism of the language allow for this. Another point, I assume you don't need this, yeah? And the typology and the internal dynamics of the system is enough for this. And probably you have explained this, yeah, a little bit in a hurry in point 76 about linguistic interference, yeah? So actually, I assume again, probably you don't need it, yeah? Also, and at this point, I would say the case of Plator, this the term is labeled at Illyrian, but Illyrian is no linguistic concept. Illyrian is a geographical and political term, and the tendency to attribute as to a language something which is labeled as Illyrian is groundless probably. Yeah, apart from this, Plato occurs also in Oscan, and it is also explained as Illyrian, but actually Plato looks like a Greek form or simply as a short form of a compound with plati and so on and so on. It is not say that it did not belong to the people of the Illyrians, but it is, you don't need to say that this is Illyrian, and it is no matter to get into the question of Illyrian is Celtic or not. I assume that with your internal explanation, those got perfectly. And I have a last point, but probably it is too long, and we can, is a point which will reappear in the next papers. So from as outsider, I can only accept the view that what you have in this inscription and so is a Greek dialect, yeah, which may be explained, yeah. And I assume that it is all we can know about, yeah. Also the question if the Macedonian was originally a Greek language or not, it is another point, yeah, which thank you very much. Yeah. Is okay? Further questions, remarks? Well, also then we close the session, and I can say that I am not especially happy to close this session, yeah, but we have to eat. Thank you very much.